And we have croissants that have a lot of stearic acid, which this is just over my head. I don't think I'm going to tell out. Do you have certain I call them sources of fat that are best? Like I often personally will say salmon all the time, flax seeds, and to a lesser extent, avocados and whole eggs. I'm not really a big fan of avocado being this amazing source of omega-3s and so on. Am I missing some? Is there some fats out there? Because, you know, there's the nuts. We all know where there's fats. Is there specific, like a top 5 tier list of fats, the healthy ones that you should have in your diet that you recommend for people? Because, I mean, if you say peanut butter, I'm going to lose my mind because like, there's just so much fat and I'm like, the calories add up and people put in a teaspoon and it's actually 200 calories. So it's a globbing hunk of peanut butter. So what is it? I can't wait to hear.
Yeah, great point about the peanut butter. And it's, I think one of the things people need to be careful with fats is like peanut butter, nuts, those sorts of things. It's very easy to underestimate your intake. If you're going to use fats like that or oils, you probably need to weigh them because even volume measurements are not going to be accurate. If you do, I promise you, take a tablespoon, scoop out peanut butter and even level it off. Go ahead and level it off with a knife. You let me know if that's 16 grams. Because I'm
disappointing.
I'm going to tell you it's not. And then if you're like people where you're doing this heaping tablespoon, I mean, my wife and I did this once just like for an experiment. We just pulled out a scoop of peanut butter, put it on the scale. Repeatedly, it was anywhere from 35 to 42 grams on one scoop. Like if you think you're having a scoop of peanut butter and you're having a serving, you're kidding yourself. So great point on that. As far as what the app does, we're more so trying to meet people way down at that bottom rung. So we basically just say, we want you to get this much fat. And then we have educational videos out there to help people like, hey, this is what we kind of recommend. These are healthier food choices. And we're actually doing a rewrite of the app right now. And we're going to start putting in more coaching prompts. So if we, for example, in the future, if we detect that, hey, you're not getting enough fiber in, it'll send you a coaching message saying, hey, you should up your fiber intake or, you know, things with fats, those sorts of things. So I think that that'll be super helpful for people. We don't have it in there yet, but it will be something that we're working towards putting in there over the next year. Now, as far as like top tier fats, I mean, again, it can depend on what your goals are, but, you know, I would say if you're just looking in general at the research literature, again, omega-3s are way up there because there don't seem to be any downsides. The only downside I've seen from omega-3s is some people who already have like really thin blood may be at increased risk of like bleeding from omega-3s because they're COX inhibitors, I believe. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But I mean, that's a very small percentage of the population to get benefits, right? So for the most part, there doesn't appear to be any harm. And then as you move down that rung, you know, sources of polyunsaturated fatty acids, you know, there's a lot of evidence that if you substitute saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats, that you get a reduction in your risk for heart disease. I know that there's really pro-saturated fat people out there that will argue with me. I'm sorry, you're wrong.
I was going to say, I'm not one of those. I'm against saturated fat for the most part. Not that you can't have any. I just don't think it's like hugely beneficial. But like you're saying omega-3s and polys, and like not everyone, like just think my audience is probably not educated enough. Like when you say poly, they don't know what you're talking about. Could we list actual food sources? So I'm going to throw out salmon. Please tell me it's in the top 5 because I keep bragging it up there. Is flax seeds in the top 5? And what else could we throw? I mean, feel free to say, is it a steak? Is it chicken? Is it a nut? Yeah. Is it in fact peanut butter? Like, just be brutally honest. It can hurt my feelings. If you tell me it's peanut butter, I'm just going to be like, it's peanut butter. Okay, so let's list out the foods. Like, these are the things that people are going to go, they're going to watch this video, and they're going to the grocery store in an hour, and they're like, I can lose 10%. I want 80% of the results. What are they going to add for fats in their diet starting tomorrow?
Yeah, so salmon's a great fish. Some other fish, you know, cold water fish with higher fat content tends to be really good choice. Steak, unfortunately, you know, not a ton of polyunsaturated fats, more so a source of saturated fats. Again, not saying you can't have steak, but it's not really going to be your best bet for, quote unquote, healthy fats. Nuts actually are pretty good sources of polyunsaturated fats. Now, again, very easy to overeat on nuts. So if you're going to use nuts as a source of fats, what I would recommend is either be judicious with, your serving portions, or get the single serving packs, right? Where you're only getting, 15 grams at a shot, so that, you can see that you'll know that the temptation to overeat, to just pop the top of the container and keep eating out of it, is less. But there is some really good research on nuts and reductions in risk of heart disease and those sorts of things. So I think those are a good source of healthy fats. It's interesting. I did a video on dairy yesterday that should go up. And even though dairy is high in saturated fat, high intakes of dairy are actually associated with lower risks of colon cancer, and some reductions in risks of heart disease as well. And that even goes for the full fat dairy as well. And then there's also insulin resistance. It's been shown like higher intakes of dairy are associated with lower insulin resistance. And in people in a deficit, they show that those who have higher intakes of dairy maintain their lean body mass better and tend to lose more body fat. So now part of that is obviously conflated by the fact that dairy is a source of high quality protein.
Exactly.
So that's part of it. But I would say that for me personally, I usually use fat-free dairy or low-fat dairy. But it probably appears that you don't have to be too worried about the full-fat dairy if you want to have some of that, if you really enjoy whole milk or 2% milk. The one caveat to that I'll say is there is an association with an increased risk of prostate cancer, but that isn't always consistent in the literature. And when they look at the overall rate of cancer incidence, dairy is not associated with overall cancer incidence. So, maybe if you're somebody who has a family history of prostate cancer and you're worried about it, don't have full fat dairy, but otherwise it appears to maybe have some benefits. So even though it's hard to know if it's specifically because of the fat or the vitamin D or those sorts of things, it's something worth mentioning. And then actually, Greg, this is going to be out of left field, and this comes about because there's actually a croissant diet now. Have you seen this?
No.
So, but what's interesting about croissants is they're high in stearic acid. Now, stearic acid is a fatty acid. I wouldn't consider it a top 5 fat. However, stearic acid as a saturated fat actually doesn't raise LDL cholesterol. So if you want something that's a little bit fattier, that's tastier, that isn't going to necessarily negatively impact your blood lipids, things with stearic acid like croissants don't appear to be as bad as, say, something that has like a lot of 12 carbon higher carbon saturated fat. So again, I wouldn't call that a top fat. You mentioned avocados. I think they're fine. I'm with you. I don't get the hype, but they're fine. They're a perfectly fine source of fat. But I think you mentioned all the sources that are, what I would consider to be really, really good. And I think trying to have fatty fish, very, very good idea. I think the people we really worry about are people who are vegans, right? Them getting enough high quality fats. And so for them, if you're not going to eat fish, if you're not going to be pescatarian, having an omega-3 supplement, and probably having an omega-3 supplement, like you mentioned, that has a 3, 6, and 9, probably a good idea. And then, incorporating nuts into your diet, I think would be a good idea as well.
Okay, so I think just to kind of clarify, number one, probably salmon or other fatty sources of fish.
Yeah.
That, to me, number one. Number two, probably an omega-3 fatty acid supplement, like right out of the container, as possibly being a very good choice. Nuts, however, in moderation. And when you said 15 grams, I was like, oh, crap. Because I'm thinking it's an ounce. 15 grams, people are going to be hurting and sad to find out you only get 15 grams. No one's eating, well, not no one in the world, but people are eating an ounce or two of these nuts. I mean, I certainly would not even be remotely satiated. So when people say, oh, nuts are so satiating, I'm like, yeah, because you're eating 1,000 calories worth of it. Oh, compared to your popcorn, that's not satiating. I'm like, a bag's got 200 calories. You eat 600 calories of nuts and have 200 calories of popcorn, and you're like, oh, I'm more full in the nuts. Yeah, shocker. But you got to count calorie for calorie. Also, avocados, they're good. They have a lot of fat, but not as much omega-3s and so on as the salmon, the fatty fish.
Right.
And we have croissants that have a lot of stearic acid, which this is just over my head. I don't think I'm going to tell out the viewers to go and get some croissants.
Go get some croissants. Yeah.
I don't think that's the top choice, so I don't want to put that in our tier list. But Greek yogurts and things from the dairy, I see your point, because I'm thinking, as you're saying it, I'm like, but it's high in protein, calcium, and all these different things. So I don't think we should cut that out. But I never heard, and I was expecting whole eggs, or I was expecting to hear olive oil or debatably coconut oil, because which is high in saturated fat, but from a plant source versus an animal source, being the saturated fats like in a red steak or something. So maybe you can touch a bit more on those in particular.